Okay, here we go. All right. Welcome in, everyone. Sorry, I'm just getting a little water and getting myself set up here. I'm very glad to be here today. Where are you all coming from? Tell me where in the world you hail from. I love this. What would my WWE entrance music be? Vanilla Ice. It's got to be Vanilla Ice. Okay, let's see. Where you all coming from? Hello from San Diego to looks like Mariah. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Good morning from Queens. Hey, is this being recorded? Of course, it's being recorded. Come on now. It's a live stream on YouTube. They archive them for sure. Lake Tahoe, Nashville from Lauren. Hey, Lauren. Maria from Colombia, Tampa, Sao Paulo, Santa Barbara, Minnesota, excellent. Love my Minnesota in the house. Richmond, Virginia, Albuquerque, Chico, Colorado. Can't wait to actually meet you in June. You're coming on the retreat? That's awesome. Hey, it's our last day of the early bird rate for the retreat. I'll be pumping that up in a minute. Maine, right here on the East Coast. Egypt, what? Rio de Janeiro? That's amazing. Jakarta, Indonesia. I love that. That's cool. West Michigan. Monique. Hey, but you like the vanilla ice? Yeah, I like that too. India, Southeast Pennsylvania. From the UK, Leanne. Connecticut. Dee Dee from Asheville. What's up, Dee Dee? Cape Town. Did you ever make it around Detroit when you lived in Michigan? Yeah. I have family that was in Detroit. I wasn't there often. Cape Town. That's amazing. Canada, Seattle, Toronto. Oh my God. Sweden. Fantastic. Atlanta. Monique's from LA. She's one of our new readers on staff. Check her out. Wisconsin, India. Oh my God. This is amazing. You make so much. I make so much sense. That's news. Tell my wife and kids that. do it for me. Okay, let's see here. Sweden, Marine from Minnesota. Love it. Did I meet you at the Equinox event, Marine? Your name sounds familiar. Cassandra, yo, another staff reader from our area here. Good to see you, Cassandra. San Diego. All right, cool. Well, welcome in everyone. I'm really glad to be here today. The intention of today's talk is to give a friendly presentation for skeptics on what astrology is and how it works. I'm going to get to that quickly. I don't want to waste time because the last thing that I want is for people who are skeptical about astrology to come here and be made to wait listening through a bunch of dribble. So I don't want to waste anybody's time. And hopefully, my hope is that for people who are skeptical of what astrology is, even if they aren't here listening live, that for our audience, there will be a point of reference. Hey, there was this particular live stream that the astrologer that I follow did, and it's really accessible for people who are skeptics. People who have like really serious doubts about astrology, who think it's total crap, who are curious, or who want to understand a little bit more about it because, your girlfriend or your wife is into astrology. A lot of men out there are in that category. And please, help it make sense for me. So that's really, that's really what the intention is behind today's get together. So I'm going to break this into parts. First, I'm just going to get right into our presentation, and I've got a little talk prepared, followed by some live demonstrations that are meant to address what astrology is, again, for people who are skeptical. And it's my hope that not just talking about what astrology is, but actually seeing some live demonstrations of astrology. I'm going to bring some people into the studio here with me and offer some live readings so you can actually see it done. And I'm going to try to give you some bite-size experiences or samples of astrology that also illustrate what astrology is and how it works in a way that I don't think, honestly, I really don't think testing, any kind of empirical testing, will ever do justice to. And I'm also going to tell you why. As I show you demonstrations, I'm going to show you why this kind of demonstration works and why empirical testing does not. And I'll do my best to explain, why that's the case. After we have done that, I will break and do my promotions for the day. This will be an opportunity for me to tell you about the upcoming year 1 program and the retreat. So I'll do a little promotion of that in the middle today. And then after that, I'll open up for Q&A. Now, the Q&A could be for anyone in the audience or who's brought a friend who's skeptical. That will be a totally appropriate time to ask more questions if you have them. But also, I will open the Q&A to the broader astrological audience, and just any questions you have for me, as a content creator, as an astrologer, about astrology, anything whatsoever will be open and fair game. So, all right. I'm also, to start with, I want to tell you how you can join me for a reading today, because I'm going to need some guests. And I want to give a few instructions for who my ideal guest is for a demonstration. So please, if you don't check these boxes, do not submit your info. And I'm going to tell you how to submit your info in a second. First is, it would be ideal for me to have someone who's in their mid 30s to 50 years old. The reason for that is that we're going to be doing some work with prediction going backward in time, because going forward in time will be part of what we do, but it's only so useful when you're trying to demonstrate astrology for skeptics. So we're going to go backward in time with some predictive work. And so I need people who've lived enough life to have some stories. And the ideal range for a demonstration like this is going to be mid 30s to about 50 years old. Anything older than that's fine too, obviously. Now, the second instruction is, if you're going to submit and come in the studio, submit your birth data and come in the studio with me, I need you to have a good memory. The reason for this is that if we go backward in time, I need someone who has a pretty vivid recollection of, years in your life. If I say, hey, what was happening in 2014 around this topic, I need you to be able to have pretty good recall of the major themes, events, topics, timelines of your life. So if you're someone who has a poor memory, a demonstration like this is not going to be maybe ideal for you. So, we want to give the best demonstrations of astrology we can for skeptics. So please be on my team in that, in that respect. If you have a terrible memory, don't come on, because we're going to do some memory work. The other thing is, ideally, I would like people who right now have a specific topic that is a question for you. Obviously, the big ones are things like career and money, or love and relationships, or whatever. Try to submit when you submit. Try to submit with a specific subject that you would like to talk about. The specificity of the context is very important for good astrology. So you have a good memory, you've lived a little bit of life already, and you have a specific topic that you'd like to talk about. Those are the prerequisites for the reading. And here's how you can do that. If you want to join me in the studio, you're going to send an email to this email address. I'm putting it into the comments section right now. It is grabbed@nightlightastrology.com. This is the email address that people typically send us their personal astrological stories for our Grabbed episodes. So send me an email and make sure you include the time, the date, the location of birth, the topic you'd like to speak about, and your age. I could probably do the math in my head, but that'll just help me. Just keep it simple. So anytime as I'm going on and you want to join the show today to be one of our client demo charts, just send an email to grabbed@nightlightastrology.com with a time, date, location of birth, the topic that you'd like to speak about, and your age. And yes, you need to be on the mic and camera. You need to have a working mic and camera, be in an environment that's not crazy, right? That's quiet, ideally. And you have to be willing. This is like a lot. We're kind of mimicking like a day in client practice. So you need to be able to come on the mic and camera. And also remember, you're in front of a live audience. So don't come on if you're not open to talking about yourself, rather openly. Obviously, we don't have to reveal all the bloody details of life, but you need to be able to speak openly and freely about your life in front of an audience here. So keep that in mind. This is recorded and kept on YouTube as well. So if you don't feel comfortable, don't submit your info. All right. So so that's the grabbed@nightlightastrology.com, time, date, location of birth, topic you'd like to speak about, your age. Make sure you have a mic, camera, quiet environment, you feel comfortable. Now, what I'm going to do is a little bit later, after I get through the talk, I will switch over to the email box. I'll take just like a 2-minute break, and I will be emailing links to some of you to join me in the live studio. You'll be in like a little green room. You'll see me here. And then I will pull some of you in for some live demos. They're going to be pretty brief, so don't expect like a full-on reading. It's kind of like a mini reading. All right. So that is what we're doing. And then, like I said, I'll do a little promo of what's going on at Nightlight. Then we'll have a Q&A. All right. Well, I'm very excited to get into this now. I put a lot of thought into what I felt would be like, what is the best, very basic, accessible introduction to astrology for skeptics? Now, the reason that I am giving this talk in general comes from the fact that on our September 7th lunar eclipse in a Jupiter-ruled sign, while Mars was squaring Jupiter, our spiritual tradition, you might say, our philosophical tradition came under attack in really two ways. And I say attack, I think maybe that's not scrutiny, The New York Times ran the now very familiar recurring article about the zodiac no longer being accurate. I did a reaction video to that New York Times article on Sunday, maybe a week or two ago. So if you wanted to see me respond and explain exactly why that article, which seems to come out every couple of years saying the zodiac is wrong, is not accurate. And to explain the history of the zodiac and how it works and how it's measured, and the debate between the tropical and sidereal systems that's existed for thousands of years. That was the purpose of that video. But that was one of two attacks that were sort of leveled at astrology around an eclipse that happened in a Jupiter-ruled sign while Mars was squaring Jupiter. For those of you who know the language of astrology, for belief systems or institutions of faith or religion or spirituality or education to come under some form of scrutiny or attack, under such an eclipse, while Mars was squaring the ruler of the eclipse, Jupiter, is very much in line with the symbolism of that eclipse. The second attack that was aimed at astrology came from a social scientist. His name's, I want to say like Adam Gates or something like that. Anyway, he posted something that got a lot of attention saying that astrologers had failed yet another test. And these astrologers, 150 people who had taken this test, the astrologers who took the test were of different levels, novice to advanced, and they had helped design the test, and they still failed. So I also responded to that, and I talked at length about why those kinds of tests don't work, and why those kinds of tests don't work is closely connected to misconceptions about what astrology is and how it works in the first place. So if any of that is interesting to you, go back to the Sunday episode that I did. I think it was last Sunday. Or no, yeah, it was either last Sunday or the Sunday before. And it's a Sunday episode where I said, astrologer reacts to the New York Times and a social scientist who says astrology is BS. So you can hear my whole response to that there. But coming out of that, I was reflecting on the fact that, not everyone is so antagonistic toward astrology. Some people are just like open-minded, curious, generally skeptical. Like, I can't tell you, I've worked with so many women over the years. Most of the clientele of astrologers are women. It's an industry fact that like 80 to 90% of the audience that consumes astrology tends to be female, and so on. I've seen a lot of women over the course of my career as clients whose husbands are either, just that's total BS, or they're like, yeah, I don't really believe in any of that stuff. And in my experience, most of the reason that these men, but really anyone, is skeptical of astrology is because they have actually very legitimate concerns that the way astrology is being framed or talked about is not true, is not real. And that way of talking about astrology is typically in the form of empiricism. It's like people trying to prove to you that astrology is an actual science, that astrology is a causal mechanistic science like physics or something like that. And a lot of people are not like antagonistic toward astrology. They're just like, yeah, I don't think that thing's a real science. That's super legitimate. That's actually a very legitimate concern and critique and skepticism. Anyone that's trying to present astrology as though it's an objective mechanistic, causal, empirical science, in my opinion, doesn't have an appropriate understanding of what astrology is or its history as a discipline and as a philosophy. So part of what I'm hoping to do today is to just address what I think astrology actually is, that probably for most people is easier to swallow, like easier to take in and go, okay, like I can get on, if that's what it is, if that's what it's being presented as, I can be at least open-minded about why people might find it interesting or why people might find it, even compelling. After I do that, it's my hope that showing some actual client demonstrations will take us to another level where you can actually see some of the magic of astrology and just how profound it is. All right. So, let's go ahead and get into it. I want to start by just discussing what astrology is. From the standpoint of several thousand years worth of the history of horoscopic astrology, we have to frame it within a broader planetary context. Horoscopic astrology, the 12 signs of the zodiac, 12 houses, planetary aspects, the language of planetary dignities, all of the things that people, when they see or hear us talking about, they go, oh, like that's astrology. In the West, we know it as, you're in Aries or you're, so this, what we call horoscopic astrology, is actually just one of many, many different forms of astral omen divination that have existed on the planet. What is astral omen divination? Well, broadly speaking, it is the idea that the patterns in the heavens, the patterns of the planets, the patterns of the constellations and stars and seasons and the rhythms of the sky have the ability to act as a kind of correspondent mirror, that the patterns of the heavens can speak as omens or signs. In divinatory traditions, that means that they have the power to speak, just like any other symbol, like a symbol in a dream has the power to convey something of psychological significance. Omens in dreams, symbols, signs in dreams for thousands of years all across the planet have been taken very seriously as something intelligent and alive within ourselves or within the cosmos, within the collective unconscious that has the power to speak. So broadly speaking, what we know of as horoscopic astrology exists within a huge global tradition of astral omen divination, believing that signs, symbols, patterns in the heavens, just like images in dreams, have the power to speak, have the power to convey something of significance. So that is actually where astrology comes from. It comes out of the planetary tradition of astral omens. That planetary tradition has many, many, many different systems. Chinese astrology, there's sub-Saharan African forms of astrology, there are South American forms of astrology, there's North American forms of astrology. I think it's remarkable that people all across the planet for tens of thousands of years were developing and living life in a kind of dialogue with the patterns of nature, not just the heavens, but the patterns of the weather and the patterns of the ecosystems that they lived in. And so, broadly speaking, all astral omen traditions, Hellenistic astrology and our signs and zodiac and all this, just being one of them, they all are actually rooted in a primordial view of the cosmos that we might call animism. An animistic worldview is common among most ancient people, ancient Taoists, people in, what am I thinking of? The Aboriginal dream time. So it's all over the planet. North American Native American peoples. They view the cosmos, ancient people do, as alive, as intelligent, as sentient, as responsive, as communicative, as conscious. So first and foremost, the way that they look at reality itself is that reality is a living being. And a living being is by definition not a machine. One of the ways that you can describe the interactions of the various features and parts of a living being is through a mechanistic language. There is like a mechanistic way in which you can describe a living being. But ultimately, a living being will always evade or escape objectification because it's alive. And so an animistic worldview privileges the relationship between the soul or the community, the village, the earth, and the rest of the cosmos as primary. So what that means is that you almost have to put yourself in a different way of thinking about what reality is before astrology can make any sense at all. And the reason for that is that it is an animistic understanding of reality that facilitates all astral omen traditions ever. So anytime you're looking at the heavens and you're saying the signs and symbols that we see as patterns from our relative position, by the way, right? It's all of the different traditions that look at the patterns of the heaven, they often share things in common because we can see the same patterns all over the earth. And yet they are always culturally situated. They're relative frameworks, just like there's not one language on planet Earth, but there are many. And not only that, but there are many dialects. That's because relational, subjective, conscious, sentient relativity in the ecosystem of reality is primary, not secondary. It's not some bullshit follow-up to an objective, it's not a bullshit derivative of an objective machine. Actually, objective descriptions of a subjective being are derivative. But anyway, so that's the animistic perspective. And like it or not, right, it just helps to understand that that's where all of these traditions are coming from. They're coming from the idea that rocks, rivers, the wind can speak, that a fox could be just a little fox, it's its own being, but it also could be a messenger from the gods, that your dreams are not just products of chemicals in your brain. One level, you could describe them in such ways, but simultaneously, and not canceling one or the other out, is the other reality, which is that a spirit is visiting you. Maybe that spirit can be partially captured by describing it in terms of a chemical interaction, but on another level, it's a spirit visiting you in a dream, talking to you. And there might be other portions of the evening in which the images and symbols are products of your own unconscious processing or digesting of experience. But then partway through the dream, your grandfather visits you and it's actually his spirit, That's animism. So when we think about astrology, you first and foremost have to put it into, I would call it a faith-based tradition, insofar as for people nowadays to experience reality in that way, given how deeply we've been steeped in empirical objectivist dogma, is a kind of leap of faith, because it means, in a sense, that you're breaking, you have to break yourself out of an empiricist objectifying paradigm. And that's a kind of radical step that for many people, they would describe what we're doing as faith-based. But remember, all the ancient people who believed that nature and reality itself was animistic didn't think of this as faith-based. They thought of it as simply the case. That it's self-evident. Just spend time in nature and you will find that there are presences that speak. Spend time in your dreams. You will find that there are presences that speak. Spend time observing patterns in any area of life whatsoever, and you'll find that patterns have the ability to reflect and correlate from some external space to some internal space. This is not radical for ancient people. This is just a fact. So it really helps to enter into an animistic understanding before ever trying to test astrology, because it's only from within that understanding that something, for example, like confirmation bias can make sense. It's not confirmation bias, it's called communication. Communication, by its very nature, seeks confirmation because it's an exchange. And so when we seek out patterns that speak, and we seek out the ability that patterns have to speak and confirm that something is speaking to us and with us, that's not confirmation bias, that's seeking a connection. So it's like on within the empirical framework, confirmation bias makes sense. It has a place. It's something to be very careful of when you're doing a certain kind of thinking and a certain kind of testing. It's not appropriate in the world of astrology because astrologers aren't seeking some kind of objective, mechanistic, complete overview of how everything operates as though that trumps every other explanation of reality. Actually, objective explanations are quite far down the totem pole in an animistic framework. Mechanistic explanations are part of life, but they're not at the top, right? The top is the living, vibrant, conscious reality that we are all a part of and in relationship with. So you have to start there. That's where the whole thing starts. Now, you could call it a faith-based system insofar as, again, for people today, like entering into a framework like this might feel kind of radical. And I get that. That's totally fair. If people were to describe an animistic understanding, a participatory, relational, ecological matrix of cosmic life as primary, if they were to describe that as faith-based, fine. That's fine with me. I don't have any problem with that because my faith is affirmed and confirmed every day in this basic truth through the way that I connect and relate with the cosmos, with life. I can't ever undo that or unsee that for myself personally, especially after 10 years of working, steeped in ayahuasca traditions from South and Central America, where this kind of primal animistic consciousness was not only basic to the way of life in the Amazon, but also completely opened up beyond a shadow of a doubt through plants from the Amazon that allow the mind to step through the veil and see this animistic reality, in IMAX 3D. I mean, it's that vivid and that bright, and you can't unsee that. You can't unexperience that. So I do have, I have a way in which my own faith has, it's kind of gone beyond for me a matter of belief, right? It's been a part of my experience. And I think for most people, astrology is like that. It goes from something, when in the beginning, you're kind of getting used to it. You're figuring out how it works. You're testing to what extent it can work or how it works. And you're not sure how to explain it to other people. But if you spend more and more time with astrology, eventually you just get to the point where you don't care how it works. It just does. And that's, in my opinion, if you look at the epistemological traditions of animistic people from all over the world, it's the same thing. They're not spending time trying to figure out how or why it should be the case that reality is sentient, alive, communicative, talking. They don't spend a whole lot of time trying to justify that. They're like, well, if you want to see it, just go have a conversation with it in earnest, and you'll see for yourself. So anyway, so the opening frame, what is astrology? It comes from astral omen traditions that permeate the entire planet, and all of those traditions are relative, culturally situated, but they all share in a framework of animism. So that's the starting point. And if you can understand that, if you can understand nothing more than that, I think you can open your heart and mind a lot more to astrology, because what you realize is that it's really kind of a mystical, primordial, enchanted way of looking at the cosmos, that it's alive and talks, and it can do so through patterns, through signs, through omens, through symbols. If you can even understand that there are a lot of people on this planet for thousands of years who have always believed that and who still believe that. In my humble experience and opinion, coming up in the Christian faith, as much as many Christians will say that they're closed to astrology, they're not closed to animism. They have a Christianized view of animism, which to them is the idea that reality is God and that God speaks. Well, it's polytheistic, monotheistic. Most ancient people were both at the exact same time. But if you talk to Christians, they're always seeing signs. They always believe God has a plan for their life. They always believe that they have a destiny that's God authored. They always believe every season is sacred. They always believe that signs and omens are guiding them, that dreams are real, that prophecy occurs, that God gives signs in all these different ways, right? So they're, like Christians are sharing the same worldview largely. And so I also say that, like, for people who are very skeptical of astrology, just remember that even many religious traditions on our planet right now who maybe not practicing astrology are still actually part of the same ancient primordial animistic view of the cosmos, because they are living every day as though the cosmos is alive and speaks through whatever name they give to God. I mean, it's just that basic. And so I think that what's really important is that people who believe that the only kind of truth is empirical do a little bit more to understand the epistemology of animistic traditions that believe that the cosmos and life and reality is divine and personal and communicative and conveying itself through nature, because that's common and it's not going away. You're not going to get rid of it. To me, what's a bummer is that these traditions can't find and see more unifying underlying commonalities with one another, and tend to condemn each other, which is really unfortunate. And it's probably more so the reason that people can't stand religion is because of the self-righteousness and the fanaticism, than it is the actual view that this place is sacred and can speak to us. I don't think that most people really would have a problem with that if people from different walks of faith treated each other as part of the same fabric of divinity, as like all of our sages have told us and always emphasized again and again. All right, well, there is a secular friendly lens that I want to mention, because let's just say all of that is too much for you. You're like, you know what, brother, you quaffed too much ayahuasca. Cool. Like that, maybe that's the case. I don't cling to certainty. I just try to stay in my heart, and like that's good enough for me. A secular friendly lens might be, let's say, astrology is nothing, if it's nothing more than a poetic interpretation of the patterns of the sky for poets, for people who like to see reality poetically. Well, maybe it's just that you value art and you value the freedom of human beings to artistically interpret the world around them. I don't think, how is that so hard to let people just have that? Now, if people, I can understand the problem. If people who have poetic interpretations of the sky are claiming that what they're actually doing is an empirical hard science, to me, that's where I'm going to agree with every skeptic out there. And I'm going to say, yeah, that's BS. That's not what this is. And I agree. I don't think that's what astrology is either. I'm much more comfortable with someone saying that astrology is a poetic interpretation of the sky for artistic people than I am people saying that it's a hard science. Now, of course, I see it as this form of divination and animism, and that's really where my faith or understanding lies. I don't think it's merely a poetic interpretation of the sky. But my point is, even if it were nothing more than that, I think that there's a lot of things that fulfill the human spirit while we're here living that are subjective and personal and about the creation of meaning. And so if it were nothing more than that, I don't really think that's a problem, as long as people aren't running around trying to claim that it's a hard science when it's not. If astrology functions as a psychological and cultural myth-making device, I think we need those. And I also don't think there's a problem with that, so long as astrologers don't go around trying to falsely claim that what we're doing is a hard empirical objective science. It's not. It's an astral, again, my view, it's a form of animistic astral omen divination, which has a really like rigorous theoretical, technical side to it, but is also fundamentally about communication and facilitating communication between a soul and the soul of the cosmos, or the anima mundi, as ancient astrologers called it. So anyway, let's move on now to talking about how divination works. First and foremost, the biggest problem that modern astrologers present for themselves and for other people when it comes to taking astrology seriously is the idea that your birth chart is like a blueprint, that it is like a machine readout of facts, that it's like a map that has like hard data in it. That is not how astrologers saw a birth chart. In the ancient world, a birth chart would be, I want you to think about it like this because it's not identical, but it's very similar. When you take a deck of tarot cards, symbols, omens, signs, totally different language, totally different form of divination, but it's similar in that you're basically believing that if I sit down and I have an inquiry, something that's bothering me, something I'm worried about, something I'm looking for some insight, I can sit down and I could cast, let's say, a past, present, and future spread with 3 cards that have 3 different positions meant to receive 3 different images and symbols that I can then use as a reflective medium for considering my inquiry. That's what divination is. That's what it's always been. It starts with an approach, with a context, with a question, with a reason for approaching the oracle. What is the oracle? The sentient intelligence of the cosmos, the sacred wisdom of this living, breathing cosmos. When you approach it with an intention, with a question, with a context, then the symbols that are displayed in whatever ritual procedure is done, the casting of cards, the heating of a tortoise shell, the reading of tea leaves, or the cutting open of the animal and the exploration of the liver entrails, the casting of the I Ching, the casting of a birth chart, what it does is then the symbols become like oracular, reflective means by which you can extrapolate certain understandings of an understanding that's rooted in your concern or your question. So what is a birth chart? In the ancient world, the primary reason for casting a birth chart was for a parent to inquire about the destiny or the fate of the soul that they had just birthed into the world. So far before you or I would ever go looking to our birth chart to get some blueprint understanding of our psychology, right? It was never looked at that way. I mean, you could certainly gain psychological insight from a chart, but the point is, the first concern was the parent saying, what will the destiny of this child that we've just brought into the world be? And there were different forms of birth charts that were cast, more or less rigorous forms of timing of birth, different moments of the timing of birth, the conception moment versus the actual birth moment. And we know that timing devices in ancient astrology were not entirely reliable or accurate. Not that they had no accuracy, but so it's really important to understand that the casting of a birth chart is not like a hard, objective, empirical thing. It's a ritual thing. Just like the casting of tarot cards, the shuffling of the deck, the lighting of a candle, the prayer, please, through the there's a belief right at the bottom of this that there's nothing random, or that even randomness has a paradoxical reason for being there, or meaning or purpose. But so when you cast the cards in whatever way they fall, you're trusting that within the way they fall and the way that their symbols reflect back, that there will be some capacity to speak to your concern. Well, the ritual moment of casting a birth chart in the ancient world might have also existed at the first time that someone came in to see an astrologer. Maybe they had no idea what the birth data was. We have tons of evidence that astrologers would simply cast the ritual chart for the birth at the time that the person approached them, right? Our whole horary tradition is born very closely to that idea. So the point being that there's this ritual moment in which the arrangement of symbols can speak to the concern. What will happen to my child? Who is this soul that has just come into the world? What will they do? Nothing in that chart is meant to be exhaustive. Nothing in that chart is meant to be some kind of absolute, fundamentally objective blueprint. It's not a personality profile with some kind of like a mapping of your DNA or something like super exhaustive. It's meant to be a kind of symbolic, oracular speaking about certain features of the soul. And what's really, really fascinating is that the ritual casting of this chart at birth is then considered something like a talisman that the soul can then have for the entirety of its life. It's as though, rather than, in tarot, we might cast a new spread every single time that we have an inquiry. That's a part of the logic of that system. The logic of the astrological system is a little different insofar as the moment of birth gives you like a particular arrangement that's static. Well, the sky is never static. So we're ritualistically, artificially freezing a moment in time and then using it as a moment of oracular significance that very magically can actually be reconsulted. It's like rather than casting a new spread, you're using the same spread, but that same spread will have the power to speak uniquely to every inquiry that you bring to it throughout a lifetime. And by the way, in the ancient world, you wouldn't do that on your own. You'd go to an astrologer. One of the things that further seduces us into thinking that it's a blueprint and that it has this exhaustive, objective mapping of who we are or something like that is it's all reinforced by the fact that today most of us sit obsessing over our own charts and trying to understand them objectively day in and day out. Right? So because we think, well, the objective truth of who I am is in here if I can just crack the code. False. That's not astrology, right? That's something else. It's called neuroticism. It's like that's not even very healthy. So the soul is a mystery. Like Heraclitus said, the soul is a mystery explored forever to a depth beyond report. We don't want anything to pin us down and objectify us. That is, and that way of looking at a birth chart is already betraying a leaning into an empirical worldview that is alien to the roots of astrology. Your birth chart should be this ongoing living medium that you look at not as you, but you look at as like a living mirror spirit. Like your birth chart is like a living mirror spirit filled with gods and goddesses like swirling around in like a psychedelic mandala. Anytime you approach it, even casually, you are speaking with an intelligent, oracular, mantic device. That's the ancient perspective. And so any reason you have for speaking it also has the power to generate new insights relative to the context that you're bringing to it in the present moment, because who you are, is not static. Neither is the sky. It's always moving. The planets will never all entirely be in the exact same place twice before the sun burns out. There is no like objective in that sense, right? You're a living being who, from the ancient standpoint, actually has no beginning and no end, just like the cosmos itself. So you can't get to the bottom of anything. You certainly can't objectify yourself through a horoscope. But what you can do is say, today, I would like to spend time with this beautiful mantic oracular mirror and look into it and see what it feeds back to me. And here's a hint. If you keep doing it obsessively, and every time you do it, it tends to feed back things that are negative or fearful or destructive, or, oh my God, it feels like the astrology will never end. It's always one healing crisis after another. Probably a pretty good sign you should shut that thing up for a minute, right? Because it's just like people constantly drawing tarot cards and getting lots of negative feedback in loops. Part of it is the underlying neuroticism of not entering into a conversation in the right way. You're entering into a conversation through a paradigm of fear or anxiety. Like, of course, you're going to get something mirrored back like that. And the sensitivity with which we approach and understand why we're approaching is fundamental to how astrology ends up working, which is why all these BS tests also don't work, because they start with the approach of astrology being something it isn't, and then testing it to be something it isn't, which of course it will then fail at. So it's the same exact thing when it comes to how divination actually works. Your birth chart is meant to be something that you have a living relationship with over the course of your life. It is not an objective, static blueprint of who you are. It is a medium that allows you to speak to the depth of your soul in every new phase of life and every new season of life. And listen to what the ancient astrologers said about why we actually practice astrology. Let me read you something. So I'll pull a few quotes from, let's pull a few quotes from Chris Brennan's wonderful text on Hellenistic astrology and the, let's talk about why astrologers practiced. Let me see if I can get my spot here. Yeah, here we go. All right, I'm going to read you a few lines that just kind of get right to the heart of it. This is Valens. Vettius Valens is a famous astrologer from the Roman era, writing hundreds of years after the actual earliest transmission, but he's kind of a compiler and cataloger of early doctrines and teachings of Hellenistic astrology. For God, in his desire that humans should foreknow the future, brought this science into the world, a science through which anyone could know their fate in order to bear the good with great contentment and the bad with great steadfastness. Accordingly, then, the initiates of this art. This is really important because the word for science, astrologia, is really a way of saying the logic or the grammar of the sky, that it has an intelligence to its patterning. But then he also calls it an art. That's very important. Those wishing to have knowledge of the future will be helped because they will not be burdened with vain hopes, will not expend grievous midnight toil, will not vainly love the impossible, nor in a like manner will be carried away by their eagerness to attain what they may expect because of some momentary good fortune. A suddenly appearing good often grieves men as if it were an evil. A suddenly appearing evil causes the greatest misery to those who have not trained their minds in advance. Those who engage in the prediction of the future and the truth, having acquired a soul that is free and not enslaved, do not think highly of fortune, do not devote themselves to hope, nor are they afraid of death, but instead they live their lives undaunted by disturbances, training their souls to be confident. He's a Stoic, so not all ancient astrologers were Stoics. We have a pretty good sense he was a Stoic. But what's really important about what he says there is that the study of astrology is not meant to amplify attachments, not attachment to who we are, not an attachment to getting to some kind of objective bottom line of who we are, not getting to some kind of obsession about every last thing that's going to happen in the future, but rather that it becomes through the study of these signs and patterns, we can see, oh, there's an intelligence at every stage of life. We can use these patterns to see reflected back intelligent, meaningful patterning in all of the good times and in all of the bad times. And this kind of reflective art, this reflective language, is meant to therefore allow us to move through the ups and downs of life in a little bit more of an even-keeled place. It's not that we're not human. It's not that we're bypassing the ups and downs of life. It's that we're not getting so freaking spun out by them. And so in both the East and the West, astrology was not about, this obsessive need to get to some kind of objective bottom line or to be able to constantly demonstrate control over every last thing that's going to happen or complete perfect understanding of everything that's going to happen in the future, like some empirical science. No, it was nothing like that. It was a contemplative, prayerful way of living through every stage, season, and moment of life. And anytime you need to look at this language, you do so that it can feed back to you. Yes, I'm in a meaningful, sacred cosmos where there is an intelligent design flowing through every last thing. And that brings me back to my heart. It brings me back to trust. It brings me back to confidence in my soul, that I am a soul that is a part of the anima mundi, the soul of the cosmos. There's nothing out of place here. That's what the language is facilitating. And it's very artistic in the way that it does that. It's not about blueprints, right? So similarly, there's another quote. Firmicus said, "This study will most successfully bring us to the point where our souls will despise everything which is considered evil or good in human affairs. For when we learn of the approach of difficulties, we despise the threat of evils because we've learned from our doctrine about things to come. We do not shrink from dangers once foretold. By recollection of its majesty, our souls have formed themselves to withstand these things. We are not overcome by bad fortune, nor elated by promise of great fortune. Thus fortified, we cannot be oppressed or overjoyed." Now, oppressed or overjoyed, he's talking about extremes. So Hermes and Zoroaster say that philosophers as a class are superior to fate because they neither rejoice in her good fortune nor are they masters over pleasures, for nor are they thrown by the evil she sends, as they always lead an inner life. So understand that from within this perspective, again, you have a birth chart, but what is that? It's like a mantic oracular mirror. And the real reason for going to it is to bring you back to your heart, to your trust, to your faith, to your acceptance, to your ability to flow through life meaningfully. And the language is not meant to do that by giving you some kind of false sense of control or perfect objective certainty about how everything works. It's meant to give you signs and omens that there is an intelligence that your mind doesn't need to circumscribe. You can just relax. You can flow along the river, so to speak. So that's what astrology is meant to be. That's why we call it divinatory, not scientific. Now, one of the main myths that perpetuates this idea that astrology is a science are dry readings. So when people come in nowadays at any time to my client practice and they say, I'm not going to give you any information, I just want you to dry read my chart, I will literally tell them that's not astrology. That's something else. And I totally get your curiosity to see, what can an astrologer see in my chart without any data or insight whatsoever. And it's not that astrologers can't see anything. Certainly I can sit down and dry read a chart and usually I can hit on some things. But that's not what astrology is, because that's a form of testing the oracle. And testing the oracle is frowned upon in all oracular traditions on the planet, like all of them. This is why also it's said, even in the prayer wisdom tradition of the Bible, don't put God to the test. It's that simple. It's offensive to say, you know what? You prove yourself to me. No, if you want to talk to something and you have even the slightest inclination that it might be a super intelligent universe that you're living in, you approach it humbly. You say, look, I'm skeptical. I don't know if I believe in any of this. I'm having a hard time with it, but I would like to engage in a conversation and I hope that you'll speak with me. Here's something I'd legitimately like to talk about. That's how you test something. Sincerely, humbly, openly, right? So dry readings, and the sense that an astrologer is supposed to sit down and be able to say something about your chart with zero context, is not oracular consciousness in the first place. That's why it doesn't work. The other thing that is really important is that we not then try to create tests for astrologers that are rooted in the same idea that, well, astrology is valid insofar as you can sit down with a chart and be able to name as many objective details about a person's life as possible with zero context and zero respect for the oracle that's actually the one that will speak, that you're just going to be interpreting on behalf of. That's what a diviner actually is. From the standpoint of this ancient tradition, a diviner is someone that reads the tea leaves. The tea leaves are the ones that are speaking. The pattern, the stars, the planets, the gods, the archetypes, the archai, the zoidion, like these are the things that speak. An astrologer is just an interpreter. It's bad karma, first and foremost, for the diviner to not approach the oracle as if it is the oracle speaking, but rather some purely mechanistic machine that they're looking into and trying to manipulate. Anytime you do that, even if you get so far doing that, because there is a logos that's at play here, but the more you do that, the worse karma you accrue, not only for yourself, but for the entire field of astrology. That's taught to us by Vedic astrologers. I'm not just making that up. That's literally taught to us in Vedic astrology. So the other thing, though, that's really important is that any time that you're trying to prove your ability by getting something right, you're disrespecting where the real intelligence comes from. It's not from you. You're just a humble hermeneutic interpreter. You're a messenger that is trying to convey something because you love the language enough to convey it. It's your love. It's the eros that allows for the interpretation to occur. Your love of the language is what it's the grace that you've received as a reader to be able to say something that's of value or worth given the actual context that's in front of you. So anyway, this is a little bit about how divination works. What does astrology actually offer? Well, I think we've already talked about, for people who live astrology as an everyday experience, who consult their chart, let's hopefully not every day and every moment obsessively, in the way I was describing, but who have a meaningful relationship with your chart. It's like a talisman. It's like an altar that you go to, that you're circumambulating, and it speaks to you and it gives you guidance. It can offer, of course, prediction, topics, themes, timing windows. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But it also, quite frequently, for people who are into astrology as a lifestyle, just like the practitioners Chris mentions here that I was just reading from, the more that astrology becomes a way of life for you, less about a particular anxiety you're going to an astrologer to talk about, and more of a language that you access semi-regularly. It really is it's a form of like contemplative intellectual prayer. It is a way of meditating on experiences intellectually in terms of patterns that provide meaning, instruction, and frequently just bring you back to a sense of like, there's a greater intelligence at work here, and I can trust that I don't have to control everything, that I can let go, that I can be in this stream of life with greater trust, greater surrender. For most people who practice astrology, that's what it's doing. And at a certain point, it's very normal and actually healthy for the obsession with getting to the bottom of your own chart to just fall off. It's not that you don't go to your chart anymore. It's not that you don't consult it. It's not that you don't pay attention to the transits. It's that you're paying attention to them like a breath or meditation practice, as a way of taking in and out experiences with a kind of reflective, circular breath. And most people who practice astrology, that's what's actually happening. It therefore doesn't help anything that so much astrology content is just so fucking sensationalized, right? It's like if we're trying to get into this reflective, prayerful stream of living with astrology, how helpful is it to be constantly thinking about transformational gateways and portals and burning off karma and transforming and living and, dying and being reborn and Jesus, It's like, that's not how it was for these ancient astrologers. For these ancient astrologers, is like the sign that you're advancing astrologically is that your living relationship with the oracle provides you with a steadier stream. Like that, I mean, there's going to be transformative events. Don't get me wrong. I go through them too. But like, when every other day the content descriptions on like 3/4 of social media's astrology is so epic and sensationalized, we've gone so far afield from what astrology actually is. And that's why people are skeptical of it too, because it seems like on a certain level, it's just a kind of self-reinforcing new age narcissistic trip that people are on. And they're right. They're not wrong. So skeptics who see astrology that way, hats off to you. You're seeing it exactly as I see it, and exactly as I think many ancient mystics who thought of this as something like a monastic way of living while still having to be in the world. Like, astrology has always been for the monks who have to live in the city. In a way, that's what it's always been. So if you see it as something that seems to be amplifying the worst attachments, the worst ego trips in people on that level, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think that's astrology at its worst. And I don't mean to sound so judgmental, but like that, to me, I have to be real about that, because that's why a huge amount of people don't like astrology. So astrology, though, is meant for us to be in a prayerful meditation upon the nature of experience, and to see that it's patterned and beautiful, that we can trust it, reflect upon it, draw not just one meaning from it, but many meanings from it. And yes, predict certain things. And that the prediction element of astrology is probably what most people really want to know. Well, how does that part work? Why do you do it? What is it all about? Prediction becomes really a interesting thing to talk about, because archetypes are, first and foremost, the primary medium of the language. So planets are thought of as gods by the ancient Greek astrologers. Gods, in turn, are thought of as archai, or first principles of reality. They're like organizing philosophical dimensions of reality. So the sun and the moon, for example, are thought of as the primary symbols philosophically of the entire language. And you have to learn the whole philosophical matrix of the language for the symbols to really make sense And that's another thing that there's often what you end up hearing about astrology on a superficial level, on an everyday level, like through social media, is like 10 layers removed from the philosophical core. So a lot of practitioners are operating with like very little understanding in their toolkit of what they're actually talking about philosophically, like where it all comes from. And that creates problems as well. But anyway, the planets, the primary symbols of our language, those primary symbols are going, my dog, the primary symbols of the language are archetypes, archetypes that have correspondent philosophical meanings. So for example, the sun and the moon, primary symbols, the sun represents one, masculine, singularity, undivided, one, like yang, very similar to yang in Taoist philosophy and symbolism. The moon represents the yin, or the many. And so a fundamental principle within the language of astrology is that there is oneness and there is manyness. So for example, on a very basic level, that's where we get the idea that you and I are features of the manyness of reality. We're individual beings. And there's trees and dog outside my door, and there's a multiplicity of beings. However, that multiplicity also shares in a simultaneous oneness. It's all one thing, even though it's many different things at the exact same time. The sun and the moon represent those as basic features of reality that was being observed by these philosopher astronomers. So, you know, and the symbolic language that emerges comes from this philosophizing about the planets and how they represent things philosophically. The reasons that they represent these things philosophically are astronomically derived. So for example, you might say, well, why does the sun represent oneness? It represents oneness because its face is steady and constant compared to any other astral symbol. The moon, for example, demonstrates multiplicity because its face is always changing and its latitude is always varying, whereas the sun's latitude is what defines the ecliptic. It doesn't vary, and everything varies relative to it. So everything else, the planets and the moon as a pantheon, exist relative to the straightness and singularity of the sun. Similarly, the sun defines the great circle of the zodiac, whereas the moon breaks that zodiac into 12 parts through 12 lunation cycles idealized in a solar year. And so the one and the many become mediums philosophically through which the basic construction of the zodiac occurs. That the cosmos is both one thing that's comprised of many things is actually observed by the communion between the sun and the moon as astral philosophical symbols. And that's what we mean when we say that they're looking at these patterns, but they're deriving philosophical meaning from them that can then become used as symbols in a language that we can speak with. Because these patterns are moving as living patterns with philosophical meaning in nature. We can reflect upon their movements in terms of philosophical and symbolic meanings with whatever context we bring to it, because that context is occurring within the orbit of these patterns. So it becomes like a mirror. And they were literally talked about this through the Hermetic doctrine, as above, so below. The doctrine of correspondences is derived from this kind of thinking. So anyway, all of the symbols in astrology are archetypal, which first and foremost means that they have philosophical cores, but then those philosophical cores can show up in human life, in the specific dramas and circumstances and unfolding of events in human life, according to a huge variety of different specific expressions. So this is why we say that archetypes, and this has been said this way for thousands of years, are both multidimensional and multivalent. Multidimensional and multivalent means that the symbols have core philosophical meanings that always stay intact, while their specific meanings can be very different. Let me give you an example. Insofar as the sun was associated with the great circle and unity and union, it was related to law and lawgivers, because the law was thought to be that thing that allows for everything to have unity. So Dharma, for example, in Indian astrology, associated with the ninth house, which is called the joy of the sun. The sun is associated with Dharma because its sense of creating a great circle in the sky that brings order and unity to the seasons and to life itself in the rhythms of nature, that is thought to be associated with law and lawgivers in human society. So you see, all they're doing is they're extrapolating from a philosophical core to a specific instance of that philosophical core in human life. Same thing with the moon. The moon represents multiplicity and manyness, or say, like, as opposed to a king and a lawgiver, which were often conflated in the ancient world, the moon was associated with the village and the city and the the life in the city that the king or the law ideally presides over or keeps together through some kind of divine mandates. Now, obviously, in the human world, this is all an ideal symbolic language. The world is constantly falling short of ideals, which is why it can be so dangerous to be a super ideologue or idealist, because that often becomes the measure by which we end up hating other people. We don't want to hate the world, so we're not trying to say that the world is somehow perfectly ordered according to astral symbolism. Oh, but the astral symbolism provides us with a medium to reflect upon the way in which life is always trying to approximate ideals or archetypes. This is why all of our movies are rooted in archetypes. This is why you can go to school and study all of the myths around planet Earth that are derived or share in common archetypes. So when it comes to prediction, what's so hard for people to understand is that prediction operates according to archetypal topics and themes. The timeline is the most concrete part of it, but even the timeline tends to be like a wave pattern that has certain peaks and valleys along a wave through a period of time. Within that period of time, what we can then do is say, here are peak periods within, let's say, a year. There's a transit of a planet taking place within a year. Within that year, there's a few little peak periods, where things are most tight or intense with, say, a planetary aspect. So that has some variance in it. And then within that wave pattern, during the peaks, we are working with a most likely set of archetypally specific topics and themes that will combine along the likely peaks of the timeline. When you look at it in that way, there is a huge amount of room for people to end up saying a bunch of generic shit because they're not very specific and they don't know how to combine archetypal themes and topics very well. Most of the time, they're not working with context, they're dry reading. And so their ability to be specific goes out the window because context is what drives specificity archetypally. And they also, will not always know how to track the peaks of the timeline very well. So anyway, broadly speaking, when it comes to prediction, here's the really fun, bizarre thing to think about. You might ask, how is it even possible that a language like this ought to include, like, how should it be able to predict anything? What is that? Well, and again, this is the best answer I've understood, but I will admit it's still deeply mysterious to me, and I can't pretend to circumscribe this kind of magic and mystery with my mind all the time. I think it's important to be honest about that I don't fully understand how it works. But I know it does, and I'll show you it does, hopefully with some substantive demonstrations here in a minute. But the best way that I can understand this is by looking at what ancient people said about time. So take this serious, for your consideration. Most of these ancient cultures believed that time was cyclical and circular, not linear. So when we think about the future, we think about something out in front of us along a linear line. And ancient astrologers are looking at the circular recurring patterns in the sky as a mirror of the nature of time itself. So Plato famously said, time is the moving image of eternity. The archetypes are therefore the planets in their cycles and circles, revolving in these patterns, reflecting something that is always in existence, has always been in existence, and will always be in existence, perfectly known and perfectly existing, in some ways transcendent to our experience of it along the illusion of a temporal linear timeline. So in other words, it's our limited perspective of time along a linear line that makes it seem so crazy that this kind of prediction ought to be available in the first place. But actually a non-linear circular view of time where everything is already existent and present eternally in a circle is what's being tapped into through these circles in the sky. And that blows our linear mind time and time again. But I also promise you, it gets to a point where it's not even that surprising anymore after you've done it long enough. I can sit down with someone, and I'm not kidding you when I say this. Here's the kinds of things that I do regularly in my practice. I don't sit down and dry read for people, first of all. I think that's BS. But I mean, I've done it before, but it never goes as well as when someone provides me with meaningful context. So one of the things, I'll just give you an example. This comes from the last chapter of my book that I've just finished writing yesterday. So let's just say I remember a very vivid story. First year of reading charts for people, and obviously very nervous. I sit down with a woman, and she didn't really have a context for being there. So I was stuck with that, like, great, I'm in a dry reading situation. And even early in my career, I realized right away, this is not ideal. It's always better if someone has a reason for being there. So I just say, I look and I see in the past year, about a year ago, she had eclipses in her marriage house. I said, are you married? And she said, no, why do you ask? I said, well, you had eclipses in your marriage house last year. I'm just wondering how that went for you. Well, her husband had died, unfortunately, of cancer, and she's still pretty young. So this was real devastating. And so can I sit down and do I know that eclipses in her marriage house meant that her husband died? No, because that's not archetypal. That's not multivalent. What I know are topics, themes, and timelines. Eclipses in the marriage house most likely mean that some dimension of interpersonal relationships went through an important, more pronounced period than your everyday stuff. Eclipses in your marriage house frequently will correlate with major events around interpersonal relationships, marriage, partnership, etc. So that was all I knew. It wasn't like I had some psychic ability to see that she had lost her husband, but I asked that meaningful question based on a pattern that I could see, a topic, a theme. Were there any real life-changing events around marriage, right? Oh my God, I lost my husband. 2 minutes into the reading, she's in tears because someone she doesn't know can sit down and pluck a timeline, or a peak moment timeline. It was down to within a couple of months around eclipse season that this occurred. And I was able to say, hey, look, you had some eclipses here about a year ago around this time. What happened? Oh, my husband died. That's astrology. And then I said, oh, well, let's go back in time. About 19 years ago, you had eclipses also in the marriage house, gave the date and time. What happened around that period of time? Well, that's when I met my husband. Okay, so now in 10, 15 minutes, someone has approached an oracle. They're in a period of loss. They're feeling a little disoriented, but they didn't even have a clear question. I'm sitting there going, well, what's the most obvious thing I see having happened recently in this chart? The most obvious thing that occurred to me in the chart were the eclipses in the marriage house. So I said, well, like, what happened? I lost my husband. Oh, wow. Well, what happened 19 years ago when it was there? Because it's like, well, maybe there's a story arc. Maybe there's something we can connect from one eclipse period to another. Because I'm struggling here. This woman's crying now, Oh, well, that's when I met my husband. Oh, now we're in serious, like, take off your sandals, sacred space, because the astrologer has sat down and has been able to accurately predict, without knowing anything about this person, the occurrence of the husband's death and the occurrence of the meeting of the husband. And I remember that woman being really blown away and not needing anything else, right? It's like, that's enough. You just got what you paid for, in terms of someone being able to say, I can see that there was a meaningful moment right here in marriage, and there was another one right here. Yeah, that's when I met and lost my husband. The kind of things that people take away from that experience are very, very simple, deceptively simple. Oh, I can trust that every season of life has a meaning and a reason and a time. It's like, is it the Proverbs or the Psalms? Like, there's a season for everything. And a person in that kind of experience goes, I trust that I was meant to meet my husband when I was, because this guy sat down and saw some eclipses in the marriage house the year I met my husband. And then he's gone now, and I lost him tragically, but there were eclipses in the same place. I can trust that it was his time to move on. That simple trust That's the gift of astrology. It's not meant to be anything more than that. It doesn't have to be anything more complicated than that. Most of why we need astrology on a daily level is not meant to be more complicated than that. Right? And so when we try to prove astrology in all these empirical ways, first of all, I mean, look at did as an astrologer, I mean, I took a meaningful guess, informed by logos, like informed by my craft, by my technique, by knowing, okay, well, she has nothing to talk about. So the biggest thing that recently happened were eclipses in her marriage house. They looked like they were, kind of big ones. One of them had landed like right on her descendant, which is a critical degree in that house. So it's like, okay. But I had no idea because I have topics, themes, and timelines archetypally. So that's what we're doing. And I think skeptics can be relieved to know that that's what we're doing. And that it's not like astrology can't be so objective and specific because it's divinatory, it's symbolic, it's meant to give us, it's like it's this magic oracular wishing pool that you're looking into, and that always works better if you have a reason that you're looking into it. Well, then the astrologer knows what images to draw forth from it. And the basic reason that we're doing it is not to prove that we perfectly know the future. It's to give the soul comfort that your life is meaningful. And actually, like in Vedic astrology, this is said very explicitly. The more you do astrology, the more you start developing this trust in the flow of life, that it's sentient, that it's intelligent, that you're in a communicative cosmos that you're a part of, a special part of. You start seeing that more and more. You drop out of needing to control things or being so obsessed with who you are or what you have to do or something like that. Like the gift is this kind of simple feeling of just being a cosmic animal that's part of the cosmic animal. That doesn't have to be anything elaborate. Astrology will always resist mechanistic proof because it's oracular. What is alive cannot be objectified. Tests will slip through the cracks because the cracks are the cracks of a living animal. To me, anytime that people try to test astrology and it comes into my orbit, I'm reminded so much of the teacher who has meant the most to me around this animistic divinatory perspective. That's Jeffrey Cornelius. He said in his book, The Moment of Astrology, which is a fantastic book about the history of astrology and divination, he said, tests to astrologers can always be reflected upon as a message or omen or sign in and of themselves. And for us, it's probably better to reflect upon that level of things than trying to convince something of someone that they're in a completely different paradigm, and are not going to have an easy time understanding from within a paradigm that's fundamentally different from the one that we're living and breathing in with astrology. Okay. So what I want to do now is just give some practical demonstration of the archetypal nature of prediction and the sort of oracular divinatory component. And the way that we're going to do this is by having some people come into the studio, and we're going to start with a topic that is important to you. And I'm going to show you specifically how I work and kind of the limits and extent to which prediction is actually working for most astrologers, which I hope these little live client demos will do. To me, this isn't exactly testing astrology as much as it is just sort of trying to take you behind the curtain a little bit and be like, this is actually what we're doing. It's not as crazy as it seems, So I'm going to shift now to the inbox, and let's just see. All right. I'm going to send you some all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send several live links to join me in the studio. Okay. So check your email. If you sent me something, please be sure you check your email because I'm going to send you a link. And you have to click on the link and then you'll join me in the studio. So Kyle wants to talk about career. I'm really excited to hopefully bring in some skeptical men or even non-skeptical men. We don't always get men visiting the channel, so that'll be great. Let's see here. Kim wants to talk about relationships. Kim, so I'm going to send you a link. Going back through here. So, Sally, I'm sending you a link. Nicole, I'm sending you a link. Now, I'm not going to be able to have everyone on, but sometimes people drop off or the feed isn't working. So I always bring in more people than I'm going to be able to get to. So please don't be offended if I can't get to you. But I'm going to hopefully get to a few people. All right. And Arian from Rochester, Minnesota. Got to get at least one Minnesota person on. Okay, so I've sent some links. I'm really excited to do some demos here. So now, all right, Kyle, you ready? Hey,
I'm ready. Hey,
how's it going, man?
it's great. How are you?
Good, good. I'm glad that you're here, and I appreciate you just making yourself available for hopefully some good demos for folks. Can I have your birth date?
May 4th, 1989.
Okay, and the time?
12:45 a.m.
All right, and the place?
Summit, New Jersey.
Cool. Okay, great. So I'm going to put your chart up. It's in whole signs. That's the kind of Hellenistic framework. And yeah, let's talk about it was career, right? Tell me what's on your mind about career.
Yeah, so I think my career, my whole life has been a kind of moving target. Very, I guess, a lot of education. First real career move was engineering out of school. Went back and got an MBA, and then started my own business, and then quit that business. And it's just been a very interesting evolution of career for me in a way that keeps moving in the direction of fitting the lifestyle that I'm trying to be living, quite nomadic at the moment. But at the moment, I always kind of reach this point with each job that I work that I feel the limitations of it, and I start to look at or feel the need to find something more in alignment with me.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm at a place right now that really feeds my lifestyle, but I just continue to feel this deeper calling. I think being in the midst of my nodal return might have a lot to do with, I guess, the unrest in me at the moment.
Yeah.
I feel a lot of creativity turning on. I've picked up guitar recently, so just seeking more alignment in that regard.
Sure. Let me just ask a question or two so I can understand some of the context a little bit more. So you were talking about you get to a place with career endeavors where something about it isn't satisfying, or you end up feeling stuck. Did I kind of hear that right?
Yeah, I feel the limitations of it.
The limitations of it. That's what you said. And does it feel as though it's competing or conflicting with some other specific need, or is it like a regular thing that it conflicts with?
Freedom, in a sense, I would say, is what it conflicts with. Although my jobs increasingly have been giving me more and more freedom, so maybe creative expression, I think, is what I feel it conflicting with.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So what I want to do now is I just want to try to demo some backward looking prediction, because we can't demonstrate how prediction works going forward unless we have you back in 6 months or something, so I will give you some forecasting, for sure, because I want you to have some timelines to take with you, but I want to go backward in time first and just sort of do some demoing. I'm going to highlight some transits to places in your chart that I'm imagining are probably connected to the pattern you're describing around a work endeavor, maybe feeling a little stuck. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a bi-wheel. Okay. Can you see the chart on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So what I want to do is I want to go back in time to here. So the first thing that I'm going to look at is the symbol in your chart that to me speaks to the most basic primary emotional need for freedom. Okay. That to me is going to be the moon in the sign of Aries. Now, the reason for that, let me explain to people who are, I'm going to try to explain the logic of how I'm reading in case there are skeptics listening to this. So when a client comes to talk to me and they're like, hey, I want to know when, maybe I'm going to find a career that I don't end up feeling stuck in, right? It's like how many people have come to me asking that question over the years? Thousands. So it's a very basic human concern, and it's not very extraordinary in a sense because it's so human. So, but every chart will have a different way of helping us locate the patterns that are constellating around whatever the specific dynamic is with a career being unsatisfying. So in this case, the clients provided a little context, which is that I end up feeling a bit limited or restrained or confined or, something like that. And I need freedom. I need freedom. Okay, so what I want to do first and foremost is find the tension between something like discipline and commitment and stick-to-itiveness and freedom. And there are many, many symbols in astrology and their combinations that can speak to that. For example, in Kyle's chart, one thing that we see is that he's got Saturn on the ascendant. Oh, there's the big circle. Let me. So yeah, that's its own divinatory personality, by the way. Saturn is on the ascendant. And so many times when the planet Saturn, which often represents things like restraint, restriction, discipline, etc., is right on the ascendant, that's a critical degree associated with personality, psychology, body. And a planet on the ascendant is often one that a person has to free themselves from, or it's one that a person needs to become more identified with. So let's say Kyle had zero responsibility. He had zero ability to be responsible, had zero ability to commit. Saturn on the ascendant in a chart with that problem would present as a planet seeking incorporation or integration into the personality, and that might be a way of talking about it with a client. On the other hand, if Kyle presented as someone who was so committed, but then tended to undercut his own freedom or his own exploration or spontaneity or creativity or childlike nature because of a tendency to be too serious, then Saturn on the ascendant might be something we talk about as something to be freed from, as something to be loosened. But it's relative. So you see how the same symbol can speak differently. This is why in a personality test, if someone were to say, what does it mean that Saturn's on the ascendant? Without context, you have two polar opposite ways that Saturn on the ascendant will often show up. You'll have many people presenting with Saturn on the ascendant as very strict, disciplined, sometimes rigid, conservative, highly committed people. And you'll also have another handful of people with Saturn on the ascendant who, maybe completely lack any kind of staying power or stick-to-itiveness. They feel like Saturn is an old man they're trying to constantly escape from. So that's why it becomes really difficult to be objective about something subjective like an archetype that can be multivalent and expressed in different ways. So context drives how you interpret Saturn on the ascendant is the important point. But in his chart, it's Saturn in a square with the moon in Aries, to me, that speaks very loudly. Because the moon in Aries is very freedom loving. it's a moon that, without getting too technical, it's a moon that loves movement, that loves freedom, that loves spontaneity, that loves to be independent. So we have a square between Saturn on the ascendant and the moon that could speak to the internal level of the dynamic that's being experienced externally in a career. So a lot of the times what we're doing as astrologers is trying to identify the psychological components of an external situation and maybe illuminate them for someone. Hey, there's a tension here between these two things. Maybe that's what's at play rather than some literal fate in the career or something like that. But one of the ways you can test these things in a reading is to say, well, let's look at what happened when one of those planets had pressure applied to it, right? So if Saturn or the moon experience a great pressure, what kind of events come up in life? And often you'll find that there's a meaningful connection between those events and the pattern, if you've sort of correctly identified it in relation to the career. So for example, let's go, what I'm going to do now, Kyle, is I'm going to take us to, we'll try this one first. And these can be a little hit or miss, but we're going to take Pluto forward to the moment that it squared your moon. So looks like we're going to get it right about, and I'm taking it to what I was talking about earlier is like a peak period, a peak moment. So for us as astrologers, that tends to be when a planet, a transiting planet, gets to within 3 degrees of a natal planet. In the outer wheel of this chart, you're seeing the transiting planets being superimposed on the original positions of the planets at birth, and you're seeing them move through and create different geometric configurations. This one is a square. So you can see Pluto, this planet at 25 degrees in the outer wheel, is creating a square to the moon at 25 degrees in the inner wheel. Now, the first exact pass comes about in the very beginning of 2021. But Pluto is existing within 1 degree of that moon for most of the entire year. It comes back to an exact square around the summer of 2021 in July. And then through direct motion, it's going to come back one more time around December of 2021. Now, in 2022, it gets into a few more little aspects, but let's just start with 2021 and let's ask what was happening that year. Now, with the moon, we might think specifically in the 4th house as the ruler of your 7th in terms of things like marriage, home, family, living environment, familial or ancestral karma. Those are the interconnected topics of the moon, but also anything pertaining to your emotional or psychological, like inner life would be appropriate too. So Kyle, I'm hoping you have a good memory. Can you think of anything that was happening in 2021?
Yeah, that's a fascinating time. In this regard, it was the end of 2020, I think, that opening square that you said that, I got on the road full time for my company that I was growing at the time. I became like traveling sales for work. So there was a big feeling of freedom in that at the time. And about a year of that, which is where the chart is now, sold my condo and moved onto the road full time for my life and my career and everything. So big changes in freedom and just my relationship with my career at that time.
Right. So, well, now let me just pause for everybody because that may not seem like a big deal, but it actually is pretty profound. So what I was able to do, like really quickly with astrology, someone comes in and they say, hey, I have an issue in my career I'd like to talk about. And that issue is that I get into these situations where I end up feeling sort of stuck and restricted. And I really, really value freedom, And I say, okay, I think I see the planet that values the freedom. I think that's the moon in Aries. So let's see what was happening relative to this theme of freedom and your career under a transit that would have placed exact pressure on that place in the chart. And what we can see, I can go back in time, pick a transit, and I know those themes and topics are very likely to be active and present and expressing during that time. And what was happening during that time, I have no knowledge of this. I didn't have any specific guess as to what was happening outside of the themes, topics, and timelines because of archetypal multivalence, but sure as shit, right? There's Kyle going on the road and having this pretty significant transformation in his career relative to his need for freedom. And that's exactly what we would expect when this planet, more than any other planet in the chart that loves freedom, is getting activated, right? So that's astrology. Now, like demonstrating that, the reason that it's hard to demonstrate that, there are a few reasons. One, it requires context. Notice how Kyle brought context and he brought the description of a pattern, which I was then able to recognize along the lines of a symbol in the chart, which then I can predict those themes, topics around this timeline would have been amplified relative to this inquiry. That's astrology. That's why it can't be tested, because it's so contextual and it requires the sensitive reading of a practitioner who knows how to map the context into a symbol and then track its development. That's nothing that can be done in a test that 150 astrologers take. You can't resemble that in testing. Not unless the testing became archetypal like this anyway, if you see what I mean. Even then, I would be hesitant, because I'm not going to lie, I also believe it is the loving, connected relationship that I have with the oracle that has facilitated at least a good amount of my ability to do this. It's not just my brain, right? It's like an artist. How do they become really intuitive moving around the neck of a guitar? Time, experience, and some kind of grace or mercy that flows through their hands, I guess. Right. And I think most artists think of it that way. It's the muse. It's not me. I don't know where it comes from. But that's why you also it's like a good astrologer can demo what they do, but it's hard to create a test that doesn't take that personal part of the astrologer into consideration as well. It's an art form. So anyway, all right, Kyle, thank you. What I want to do next is just let's talk about what I think is likely to occur next. So to me, what we're really talking about is, okay, there was a really radical, seemingly very positive moment where greater facilitation of freedom came into your career, and that's going to be important. So to me, what's the next step, right? It's like how does that theme continue and maybe evolve into the next part of the story? How do we bring that freedom into a career that can have some staying power? So what I would do is I'm going to look for symbols that can speak to the need for creative fulfillment and, let's call it, emotional and physical freedom at the same time. So here's what I'm looking at. First of all, when I think to myself, where does a person really feel like they're in touch with their creative essence? It's the fifth house. You've got a fifth house sun in Venus, so I'm going to track a transit if I can to your sun, because to me, when the sun gets activated in a really strong way, people often feel not just free, but like you're in that beam of light that's directing your life, and I think that's probably a good way to go here. So what I'm going to look at is going to be this. This is Pluto squaring your sun. Now it's a little ways down the road, but this, as you probably know, Pluto has a very slow burn and slow buildup. So its approach to your sun within 3 degrees is going to begin in a little less than 5 years. Now, I know on the outset, if I say 5 years, a person will immediately think, oh, great, I'm screwed for the next 5 years. No, it means when I see you potentially like really starting to step into something that feels like your life's calling. Frequently, in my experience, those are sun transits, and they're with Pluto activating them, because it's such a slow, steady, developing transit. It's going to be building slowly over the next 5 years. You enter to about 2030, and now you're within that 3 degree range. Now, here's what I think is pretty impressive. So we get into that range. 2032, you start getting there. And let me just point this out so you can see. Here's Pluto at 15 degrees, right in the range. This is 2032. If we, we're going to see Pluto retrograde go back through the square in 2032, come back through it direct again by the very end of 2032. So that becomes, a very significant year. The reason that I really like that is I just want to emphasize what's happening later that year in 2033. So in 2033, you are also going to start getting south node eclipses forming over your moon. Okay, so when the south node, kind of a karmic harvester, comes over that planet that loves freedom while Pluto's igniting your sun in the 5th house, the potential for you to iron out any kinds of issues around freedom and life calling will be simultaneous to one another. Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
So that becomes a fantastic year for this kind of theme of like, I'm feeling like I'm hitting a creative stride. And I'm also, if there's anything that needs to be purged or released, there's anything immature, outdated that needs to go around that impulse for freedom that's like, let's say, childish, you can let it go with the south node eclipses. But on the other hand, if there's some part of that freedom that needs to be acknowledged as you're finding or hitting your stride, well, there's an opportunity for it to be integrated more. Either way, what I want to emphasize for everyone listening is I have no idea. I have no idea what's going to happen around this time, but I know that the overlap of that 5th house sun period with the emphasis on south node eclipses over the moon will be a period of time in which creative fulfillment and the need for freedom will be peaking in their expression, in some ways more powerfully than any other stage of his life, because he's in midlife, right? And that midlife is archetypally for ancient astrologers the period at which these questions of purpose, calling, life direction, vocation become most substantive for people. The other thing to consider is that you were born under a balsamic moon. So that balsamic moon in the 4th house as a symbol is often also about the relinquishing of something, in this case, maybe ancestral, maybe around family, around home, around living environment, and the topic of freedom. So you see, when you get south node eclipses around a balsamic moon, that moon is so intimately tied to the sun, even though they're in separate houses, because it was a balsamic moon dying into a new moon. So the simultaneous activation of the sun and the moon is actually phasally significant because the two planets are kind of being brought together at the same time, just like they were when you were born. So that's astrology. Now, here's what I want to illustrate for people listening. I'd never even seen Kyle's chart before, right? And I just pulled those. I know where to look. I know which transits to look for. I know which, if he's like, I want to find a time where freedom and meaningful creative satisfaction in my career come together, and I can identify a problematic planet in the chart, track some of its history. I can identify which planet or combinations of planets being activated at the same time are likely to lead to a shift in circumstance. Then I can track out themes, topics, and timelines. I guarantee you, from everything I've done over 15 years of astrology and thousands of clients, it will hit 2032. I can promise you these themes and topics that we're talking about, probably in ways that are very surprising compared to what we could dream up of right now. But the themes, topics, and timelines will not fail. So anyway, Kyle, thank you so much for being a guest. I hope this was useful for you, in addition to being like a guinea pig.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Adam. It's been an honor. I appreciate everything you do here.
Yeah, for sure, man. Thank you so much. I'm going to move on, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see here. Here we go. All right. We're going to do another one. Kim, hey. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. So are you already like dyed in the wool believer, or is this like, are you a little bit more skeptical? Where are you coming from?
I'd say I'm probably 50-50, and I've always kind of been interested in this type of format, but it's like you can't just go and sit in on other people's readings all the time. And I've never had, I had my chart read many years ago, and I've since lost it. It was like recorded on a cassette tape.
Yeah.
And I don't have it anymore, and I don't even have a way to play it. So I can't even look back at what she was saying, now that it's been many years since.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so I'm a little bit, I'm very curious, but
yeah.
I'm very open to it.
To me, that's the best place to be in, because I think, humble, curious, open, skeptical, cautious, those are all certainly traits I really value in friends and people that I love. So yeah, I appreciate that. What is your date of birth?
November 22nd, 1976.
Yeah, that's my mom's birthday.
Wow.
Yeah, that's wild. She's obviously born in the 50s, but yeah, November 22nd, baby, as well.
Right on.
So what is your, what do you know the time of birth?
10:11 p.m.
Okay. And then the place.
Bronx, New York.
Okay. All right. So Kim, November 22nd, 1976, 10:11 p.m. in the Bronx. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to put your chart up on the screen. And what do we want to talk about? What's on your mind? What topic could we look at?
I'm very curious about, my personal, I suppose, romantic relationships.
Mhm.
It's to me, I feel I've gone through different periods of like wanting to get into a relationship, excuse me, for growth, personal growth, as a for me, for the other person, and to see, what can blossom from the union, what we can learn from that. And then I've gone through periods where I'm like, I'm just not, I don't think I'm meant to learn my stuff in a positive way, a way that's not going to just put me through the ringer and spit me out. So I
Oh,
think I need to just focus on my other, other areas of life, that, where I can be, where I can learn and be happy and still connect with people in a very personal way. So I'm kind of teetering in that way. I'm struggling to understand. I don't get me wrong. There have been some serious learning from it, but a lot of times it's very much about learning what not to do and that kind of thing. So
yeah, yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do is right away, I know which planet comes to my mind in terms of like, oh, what is this? What is this stickler? Like what planet looks like it could be the one really sort of jabbing you in the ribs with it with this difficult pattern that you're describing. And there's not just one way of looking at things in charts, but that's how all of this usually begins. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to put up a bi wheel. We're going to go do the same thing we did. We're going to look to the past. This time I'm going to kind of hide my cards and not tell you exactly why I'm looking at what I'm looking at, just to have fun a little bit here with everyone watching. But let's go backward. All right. I want to look actually at a sequence of events. And if nothing comes to mind with the first part, that's fine. I think the second part probably will, but we're going to look at a sequence of events from the planet Uranus that were recently taking place in your chart and just kind of see what was happening. First of all, this is Uranus right at your midheaven. This is in your career house. This would have been building up in 2020. And then Uranus would have kind of constellated around the MC throughout most of 2020, even a little bit of the early part of 2021 through the spring of 21. So I'd like to hear it might seem unrelated at first, but just like what was happening in your career. I mean, obviously 2020 was a big year for the whole world, I guess, but what was happening 2020 to 2021 around your career?
so in 2020, I was living in my van with my dog, and I was up in Lake Tahoe. I had gotten a position um, to do a sort of paid internship with the Forest Service. I'm a landscape architect, and I've always wanted to do public work. And so I started in January of that year, and the pandemic happened, all this stuff, and then a permanent position became available on the Angeles National Forest. So my dog was essentially dying at the time, and I really struggled with moving him at that time. But it was like it's kind of my dream job, and I wanted to stay in California, yada yada. So I moved down to LA, sold my van, moved to LA, took my dog in October of 2020. And then he passed away at the end of November. And I was like in my sort of dream, a dream job. not the dream job, but a dream job. I've finally gotten to California. I've been trying to relocate here permanently for like 20 years. But I had lost my dog. It was like my everything. So it was bittersweet, and it took me a really long time to just be okay with getting out of bed and like, moving forward and really appreciating what was, what was growing after something had died.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's now, just so that I can like, I'm going to kind of explain to the audience what I'm doing here, and then Kim will continue.
Sure.
So first and foremost, what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at a sequence. The problem planet is probably Saturn. It's the ruler of the marriage house, right? The ruler of the 7th house is a debilitated Saturn right on the ascendant in Leo. So that's probably the problem planet. But what I was actually curious of is, I'm looking back at transits that have happened recently to that Saturn that probably would have been pretty substantive, and I noticed Uranus right away, right? But actually, just prior to the square to Uranus, Uranus would have gone over the midheaven. And so sometimes events will come in sequences that are meaningfully connected. Oh, go ahead, Kim. You got to say something.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt you, but I got completely carried away with like all the life changes at the time. So I reconnected with a guy I'd been dating back in New York in 2018. We broke up, and then he landed in California as well, and he was up in the Bay Area, and while I was in Lake Tahoe. We reconnected in the pandemic, and we started dating again. And then he really helped me through my dog passing, and then it just became really clear, like in 2021, I was like, this is not sustainable for a number of reasons. And that's when we decided to let go of that. So that was also happening. Sorry, I just left that out.
You ruined where I was going to take us next. No, I'm just kidding. No. But that's exactly what I was trying to do. What I was trying to do is show that there was probably a significant movement in career that would have been closely connected to another event in love. Now, before I'm going to say some more about that in a second, but the Uranus at the midheaven that comes first, I want you all who are watching to notice that as Uranus is constellating around the midheaven, Saturn is also opposing that natal Saturn. And Saturn and Uranus were squaring one another. So what I was trying to do is build first by telling the career part, and then I thought in sequence I'll probably get to the relationship part, just a little bit after it, which does come in 2021, by the way, which is the next timeline. But the point is that Uranus, right, a god that is an archetype that is fundamentally associated with shakeups, revolution, destabilization of set patterns, routines, habits, anything that breaks us out of monotony or anything habitual and introduces something new and exciting, but also has a disruptive effect as the new thing is coming in. That's a hallmark of Uranus as a symbol, tracking it and how it shows up. So it's transiting around a critical degree in her career house. And what happens is there's this huge shakeup, revolution, excitement about a dream job. But at the same exact time, there's a loss of an animal. And that animal, from the sounds of it, is something that was a very steady, loyal companion that provided consistency and stability. Right? Now,
absolutely. The only one in my life.
Right. Now, let's contrast that with the man that enters. Right? This guy enters, you knew him from before, and he acts as a kind of stabilizing presence during the loss of a cherished, stabilizing animal in your life. You see how he kind of is temporarily, he's walking you across that bridge, or he's like maybe also not as fitting as your dog was, not to be a jerk to him, but he did not end up being the loyal companion you would be with for the rest of your life, right? So what we would anticipate is that a sequence would happen around both love and career simultaneously just around this period. So does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Right. So that's what's incredible about astrology. I know exactly what symbol is speaking to the difficulty around marriage. So there's a logos there, there's a technique, you have to know your karmic analytics. And that's what ancient astrology is very, very good at. Modern astrology, if I have any criticism of it, it's that 8 out of 10 practitioners, when they hear this, will not be able to come up with accurate predictions and timelines and forecasts because they don't know enough about analyzing the chart itself based on the ancient analytical language. Once you know that, you can be as psychological, as subjective. You can have rich conversation. Like modern tends to be very psychological. You still be psychological, but now you know exactly the timelines, and the analytics are just more solid. So anyway, you can see that Saturn's the problem. And so the most likely thing with Saturn around the ascendant is going to be this sequence where most recently Saturn opposed Saturn while Uranus squared Saturn. And we see this overlap between things like revolution in the career versus a more stabilizing force in love, the loss of a companion, the temporary fulfillment with a new companion, but then eventually having to let go of this boyfriend. And now the $1 million question, if you're open to it, what didn't work about it? What was it that just wasn't a match? Or maybe even traditionally within this pattern in relationships, what ends up being the issue if you had to sum it up?
I mean, ultimately, the most important values in our value systems were not really aligned.
Right. Is that a
and we were in
recurring
very
thing?
different places in our lives as well. I mean, he's 12 years younger than I am, and that was one of the reasons we split up in the beginning, was that he'd wanted to go to grad school and he wanted to do some traveling because he had, spent his life up till then in very, methodical convention, do this career and military, and then, and I was like fully supportive of him, growing. I'd done a bunch of traveling and, Sagittarius thing already, and I went to grad school late in life, and so I really wanted him to, not miss out on those experiences just because, it wouldn't have done well for me necessarily, because I was looking for the adventure of stability for a change in certain ways.
Interesting. And that was a contrast from previously where maybe freedom was more important.
Yeah, I mean, I still struggle with that, but I was like, I wanted to give it a shot. I wanted to
Right.
give one place, one job a shot for a while.
So in relationships historically, would you say that the main issue, maybe up until more recently like this, has been the need for movement and freedom and ending up feeling like stuck or restricted or something? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was like the first time it was sort of flipped. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So this is perfect, right? Because what we would anticipate from a planet like Uranus, and let me just turn off some notifications. What we would anticipate from a planet like Uranus is the power of the planet to disturb the status quo of how another planet's archetypal nature is expressing itself. So Uranus to Saturn tends to show up in terms of if Saturn on the ascendant tends to be, I am an island to myself, right? And if you think of the marriage house ruler as Saturn on the ascendant, how you might feel about someone else could be, for example, you're trying to control me, you're trying to oppress me, you're trying to limit me, you think that you're more important than me. Any of those things would be very common for Saturn ruling the marriage house to be in Leo on the ascendant. Or it could be, there could be another archetypal variant where you end up being, I don't see this in you, by the way, at all, but maybe you end up being the one who's like bullying or domineering all of your partners or something. That could be another version of it, but it sounds more like the opposite of like, I just want to be free. You're cramping my style. So when might that pattern change? It's when meaningful transits hit Saturn and say, open your heart. No one's trying to control you, or, it's like a different stream of consciousness that comes in and it says like, maybe I need to open myself, right? So isn't it interesting that as Uranus, this god of revolution, is hitting your Saturn, you lose your dog, someone else comes in, you're thinking about a loyal companion, like the love that you had with your dog, which is very pure, by the way. I think that's really beautiful. And so this person wasn't able to exactly fulfill that, but you see how it introduces a new theme and a new possibility. So when I see that as a practitioner, what I think of, based on everything I know about karma that ancient astrologers said, you're really on a new timeline now, because Saturn's not the same Saturn that it used to be. You're not, in other words, the same person that you used to be. There was something that happened around the loss of your dog, the finding of this job, the opening of yourself to commitment. Maybe all of those iterations weren't the final ones, but they opened something. And now you're living in a new timeline where that openness is permeating the field of possibilities. And so that, first and foremost, to me, is very hopeful, very exciting. Now, if we take this forward just a little bit, what I want to do, of course, is find a future timeline. So let me just say that I don't know, with someone who has 5 planets in Sagittarius, if I think you're always going to have some need for freedom, because that's a very Sagittarian theme. The 5th house, Sagittarius in particular, you really need to feel like you can live through the sparkly guidance of your own internal compass and freedom and your convictions, and a sense of like life being like an open plain you can roam about like a horse. Very important, right? You can't like take that away from you, which is why in a way it's kind of like, well, maybe the love soulmate is another dog. I'm kidding.
But that's okay. That's okay too.
And who ultimately, I don't know. But when I do think about that transit along with approaching transits, I get excited for you, because here's what I see. Starting in September of next year, the North Node of the Moon, which tends to bring in new experiences, moves into your marriage house. You're going to see eclipses starting to form in that 7th house. Now, I want to draw your attention to something that I think is pretty cool. So we're going to get the sun into Aquarius so that we can show you this solar eclipse. So here's a solar eclipse that's occurring right around the North Node of the Moon, and it's happening in February of 2027. Can you see that right there?
Yes.
Let me draw it a little neater. Now, here's what I want you to notice. The solar eclipses like this, and there'll be more, are going to probably start bringing new opportunities for relationships into your life. Maybe multiple, maybe one special one, but that's what's going to get stimulated most likely. In the meantime, I want you to notice that over the years to come, Pluto is going to be slowly working its way into an opposition with that Saturn from the house of marriage. What the image that comes to my mind when I consider that, given everything we've discussed today, is the process of gradually kind of cracking open the heart more and more to something deep and profound. It doesn't have to be tidy. It doesn't have to be perfect. But I think it's going to speak to the ability to love and be seen and held and hold at a deeper level with other souls, if not a special soul. So that to me is really exciting. Here's the other thing. While that eclipse is occurring, what I want you to notice is there's 2 other things that are happening. They're little things, but they can really augment. You have a Venus return that's happening, and Jupiter is trine to your moon from the 1st house. The reason that that's important is that all of those things tend to speak together to kind of heart-opening moments. So it would not be surprising to me as an astrologer if you were finding a new relationship opportunity by the early part of 2027, maybe say the first half from like February onward. Now, there are many possibilities that go beyond the scope of that, right? Because they're archetypes. They can express in many different ways, but relationships as a theme and topic for sure. And I have to believe, given that Uranus transit, that your heart and your life is in a different place, right, than it was, because of the kind of opening that occurred. So I think you're going to find a very different quality of relationship with those eclipses coming in.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. And thank you for letting me demo and kind of talk shop as I went through it. It's really helpful.
It's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Kim. Bye. Okay. I am out of gas, out of time. So I'm going to say thank you so much to everyone for joining me. And I'm sorry that I couldn't get to everyone. Thank you guys for waiting quietly in the studio. I know some of you weren't able to get on. What I'd like to do now is I'm going to say just like 2 more things, and then I want to open to any questions you have, just kind of an open Q&A for a couple minutes. So first of all, what I want you to notice is when she came in, she said relationships. She brought context to the oracle, not me, but to some greater intelligence that she was open enough to submit herself to and open herself to. What then proceeds is not some kind of perfect, objective, scientific description or outlining of causal powers. It's more like a spiritual counseling session with symbolic symbols that are used to guide that process, and timelines that mysteriously and magically, although similarly symbolically, will play out. They don't always play out in exactly the ways you predict, but I promise you, come February of 2000, whatever it was 27, or was it 26? Anyway, when that eclipse happens that we were just looking at, given the context of the other planets transiting, the context of where her life is at relative to the pattern that she began describing, you're going to see a shift in relationships occur. That I have no doubt about. How exactly it will look or play out beats me, you know? The ability that an astrologer has to identify the correct symbols is hugely important. Every context usually demands a specific symbol be unpacked, or that one symbol in the chart or one aspect in the chart will be most important or most pertinent to the inquiry. Most of the time, people don't learn this because they never study classical astrology. They study modern astrology, and in modern astrology, anything and everything is just a bunch of psychological impressions. It's like, well, this makes you like this, or this makes you like that. And sometimes people will be able to identify the correct, let's call it karmic significator, but often they won't be able to, because you don't ever learn like the delineation logic that ancient astrology. It's like a grammar or a dialect, and you have to learn it. And then once you identify the symbol, then you can track meaningful events and timelines in life relative to the pattern the symbol represents. So there's a lot of things that prevent people from understanding what astrology is and how it works that are really not too complicated to explain. Like, most of you probably got a lot of it just listening to this 2-hour talk today. But in application, it takes a sensitivity, it takes artistry, it takes years of developing your practice to be able to do these things and know which symbols to focus on and how, and which techniques timing wise to use, and so forth. So this is why we can't use simple tests. And it's also why at the end of the day, if you see an approach like this, you understand, oh, this is like, it has this sense of or there's an oracular medium that's present in something like this. It's so rooted in talking and conversation and images. You notice how when I was talking to her and I was breaking down that timeline, her hand shot up in the air and she was like, oh, it's because as I was explaining the interaction of symbols, she was able to remember the sequence of events that I was starting to describe before she even had the chance to, do you know what I mean? Like she jumped in and filled in the rest of the timeline before I could even perfectly outline it. And that's what I was just about to do. That's what we mean by divination. There's something very alive and electric It's been described as radicality. It's a word that's been used to describe when you're in a session and there's a charge that starts allowing some greater awareness to flow through, in the same way that musicians or artists get into a flow state. It's really hard to represent that in testing, what that is and how that's working. So anyway, I'm happy to take questions. If you guys have any questions about me, about astrology, whatever, feel free to drop something into the comments section, and I would be happy to just take a few questions before we sign off for the day. And again, thank you so much to our guests today who came on and allowed us to have some fun. And hopefully, if nothing else, like anyone who's skeptical, it's like, hey, it's hard to not respect astrology when you see some of these very beautiful, vivid demonstrations of timing and topics and themes and so forth. All right. Let's see. Katie says, I'm just happy to catch you live and see your face. Thanks, Katie. I appreciate that. That made me feel really good. What do you look at for life purpose in a birth chart? Well, to me, that is a major misconception, right? So think about it like this. Remember how we were saying that in astrology, everything is oracular and divinatory? Questions about life purpose are asked for different reasons and require different answers in different situations. So to think that there's one purpose to life that the birth chart contains objectively is a big mistake. If someone sits down and they go, what's my purpose? I'll ask, well, what do you mean? Well, what am I supposed to do for a living? Oh, okay. You mean what's your career? Like what you're talking about vocation. What's my purpose in terms of what are some of the deepest psychological growth lessons of my lifetime is a different kind of question about purpose. So there are many different reasons that people have for asking about purpose and lots of different purposes. And so specificity is important. Anytime someone says, what's my purpose in a birth chart? I honestly just kind of want to gag because I'm like, come on, life doesn't have one purpose. It's, just like it doesn't have one person or one color. So we have to be, we're so monotheistic about everything, a purpose is a monotheistic God we worship. I have a backward. Let's go to here we go. So I hope that helps anyway. How many of the sessions go into some counseling? It seems to me that there can be a lot of sensitive topics that come up in a reading. Well, I would say most have some element of counseling, but I'm really not much of a counseling astrologer. As you can see from what I just did, there wasn't a lot of like, here's what you ought to do, or advice being given. There's an element of counseling, like sensitivity and listening and holding space and empathy and compassion. Those are vital, but I think good astrology is more about creating a space within which meaningful reflection can happen rather than specific guidance and counseling, unless you have therapeutic training. But like my third year program is really all about symbolic listening, which is different than counseling. And I talk about that at length in my third year program. So yeah, I think you might like that if you come through study with us. Let's see. Can you talk about yourself, Adam, your own chart? No. No. I mean, I have a birth chart and I am a soul And apparently my birth chart says that I will love learning and spirituality and astrology, and that I'm very like I've had a lot of like practices in my life. Like I'm a very disciplined person who likes doing the same thing over and over, like whether it's like practicing an instrument or working out or prayer or meditation. Like, so it also my birth chart also tells me that I'm sort of a mild asshole. Oh, I don't know. So that's it. So when you're an astrologer, it shows in your chart and you kind of just accept your fate. Oh, I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know. I think there are, sometimes when you see astrologers' charts, there's some areas of symbolism that are like kind of like textbook, and you go, oh, well, of course, like I have an eclipsing. I was born under a lunar eclipse in the 9th house of astrology. Religion, spirituality. I grew up a preacher's kid, and my faith went through an eclipsing, and I found astrology in the process. It literally came to astrology when I was going through recurring eclipses in the same sign and house that I was born under, 9th house of astrology. Eclipses recurred when I was 27, 28 years old, and that was when I started professional astrology. So in my case, it stands out, but some charts are more obvious than others when it comes to the career path. I swear to God, like if you look at 100 actors' charts, you're going to see the path of acting or art or performance or theater show up in so many different ways. Astrology is not super formulaic in that sense, and that's why it's also very important not to try to make it into something that's like that. Let's see. How is it possible to combine Hellenistic whole houses with Placidian houses? Well, I actually wouldn't recommend it. Most people will try to combine them before really deeply understanding the entire logic and rationale of ancient astrology, which all takes place in a whole sign paradigm. Whole sign houses are not just houses. It's an entire logic. It's an entire part of the language that it's not just as simple as being like one house system versus another, which is a hallmark of modern house systems. Like, well, which house system do you use? But in ancient astrology, there was no which house system do you use? And the entire philosophical language is rooted in a whole sign house way of seeing all of astrology, not just houses. So it's really important to learn that. And then after you've learned it and integrated the whole sign house paradigm, not just a house system, but a paradigm philosophically, then you can see how it may or may not coexist with a quadrant-based form of house division. But I can promise you that until you've done that, there's going to be no meaningful way of discerning the differences or whether they're compatible or not. Let's see here. I'm looking through your questions. So nice to be hanging out with all of you guys. Sam says, I always learn so much when I hop on your streams. Thank you. Thank you. That's great to hear. Kyle, I've got so many dates to go back to look at now with this newfound knowledge. That's exciting. Thanks, Kyle. So thanks for coming on again. How does Hellenistic astrology differ from Vedic? Well, they're actually more similar than they are different. The Vedic astrology is, thousands of years of textual tradition blended with scriptural tradition from the Vedas. So it's quite a bit richer and denser than Hellenistic because we have, a handful of Hellenistic sources, whereas in India, you've got, 2,000 years of cultural, religious, scriptural coherence with astrology. So Vedic astrology in some ways is like, it's a whole world. And I have a lot of respect for it. But for the most part, the roots are very similar to Hellenistic conceptually. There's lots of meaningful differences. There's lots of things that techniques and so forth that exist in Vedic that are not in Hellenistic and vice versa, but they pretty much share the same root system. And we know that they do historically as well. What do you think about relocated charts? Do you use them? Yeah, I don't personally use relocated charts, but here's what I'll tell you. Along the lines of everything I ever say, right, is that it's not about getting a more objective chart. Relocating your chart is symbolic. So if you relocate your chart, think about it as an ingredient ritualistically in your relationship with the oracle that you're experimenting with. You arrange your candles on the altar in a different pattern. You say a different kind of prayer. You burn a different kind of incense. All of those manipulations of ritual element are so important and so beautiful. And having nuances like that is what makes the tapestry of your practice come alive. So I highly recommend people have that depth and texture to their practice. But don't make the mistake of thinking that a relocated chart is more objectively accurate, because that is the kind of thinking that makes all of us look bad. Let's see here. Both chart holders were excellent natal chart and transit examples today. You're rocking it, Adam. Well, thank you. That's great to hear. I just hope that if any people who are more on the skeptical side watch this, that they got to see something that they could wrap their head around a little bit more. That it's like the themes, topics, and timelines, the multivalence, the archetypal nature of it could be a little bit more accessible. Let's see. Well, I think I'm going to scroll down and see if there's any new questions. Adam, what do you think about remediation in astrology? Well, I will tell you, I believe that I take my advice straight from the Vedic tradition. I'm giving a talk actually in early 2026 on the easiest, most common sense, practical ways to remediate difficult karma. What do we mean by difficult karma? Let's call it life patterns that we find exhausting, draining, that are, that we suffer with. How do you remediate those things? It is 10 times more effective to do common sense, practical things to remediate difficult karma than it is to get the right gemstone or the right plant, and all those things can help. I love gemstones, got a bunch on my altar. My wife is an herbalist, use plants all the time. Ayahuasca is a great medicine that was a great remediator of difficult karma. I'm not against remediation in any way, shape, or form. But what did ayahuasca, this remediating plant medicine, tell me most clearly, most vividly? What has made the biggest impact on my life from ayahuasca in terms of remediating difficult karma? It was the basic insights that it gave me, like this. Let me give you some examples. Drink water. Don't drink soda. Eat healthy, organic, whole foods. Moderate your portions. Get enough sleep. Exercise. Spend time for quiet reflection, contemplation, prayer every day for at least 10 minutes. I mean, I've had much lengthier practices, but be a good person. Work on yourself. Have a conversation with a therapist regularly. Go to a 12-step group for ongoing issues with addiction when I came back from ayahuasca in my early 20s. It's like really common sense stuff that people get way too complicated about. Like, if you want to turn your life around, fucking take care of yourself. That's what the plant medicine told me. I kid you not. It was like that simple. That's my Capricorn moon sense of humor, but it's true. It's like, and I don't pretend to know what that means for every person. So don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be prescriptive, but it's like, it is as simple as like, if you want to remediate bad karma, take care of your health, take care of your psychology, take care of your relationships, take care of what you're putting into your mind and body. Like, if you do those things, you add good stuff and take away some bad stuff, even in small amounts, man, do things get better. We don't need a gemstone for that, although gemstones can also be great. Like, add them along with it. But what do you think you're going to get out of a gemstone if you are drinking Coca-Cola 24/7 and not drinking enough water? The caffeine, the corn syrup, that's going to jack you up far more than a gemstone can help you with. You know what I mean? Like gemstones are being used, if you think about it, by cultures and people whose basic everyday existence, in some ways, their worlds were messed up compared to ours. It's not like I think everything in the past was better, but by and large, like people are really unhealthy now compared to how many traditions and cultures around the planet have lived. I'm talking about basic things like nourishment and food and everyday like biorhythms. Like you know, we're troubled, right? We have like addictive substances in almost all of our food right now. So if we just get a little healthier, it's amazing how many positive things just flood in, and all of a sudden difficult karma is just remediated. You know, that's all I'm saying. And I'm not trying to be such a cynical dick about it, but it is kind of funny how simple it can be. Okay. I like it. It's not even funny at this point. It's common sense. I know what you mean, you know? So on that note, I want to briefly promote our programs. If you guys were like, man, this was my jam today. I like the philosophy. I like the technique. I like the live readings. This is like a little, much more disorganized, unstructured microcosm of our programs at Nightlight. On November 8th, we have our first year course in ancient Hellenistic astrology beginning again. We have had thousands and thousands of students over 16 years now go through our courses. It's what I'm best at. Teaching and demonstrating how to do astrology. Like, even I'm a good reader. I think I'm decent, I'm a veteran at this point, I guess. And like, you've seen me read, and, I think obviously having a full hour with someone can be a lot more substantive. And when it's private, it's a different dynamic. But what I'm really best at is teaching. And so if you're someone who's like, I really want a firm foundation in the ancient technical philosophical language of astrology, it gives me an understanding of the why behind all of the techniques. Why do houses exist in the first place? Why do signs exist? What is an aspect? Why did it ever come about? Most of the time we're taught an aspect is a square and a square means this, but we're never taught, where did the idea of an aspect come from? Why did it ever get included in the language? And what is an aspect philosophically? And when you understand that level of astrology, wow, you really are like, you're like the magician who really understands the arcana that you're working with. And then you can move about fluidly, more intuitively. You develop more confidence. And you develop the ability to speak your own voice rather than just speak in cliches. Because when you understand where everything comes from, then you have that understanding by means of which to delineate in your own voice, because it's the understanding that provides your voice the capacity to do its own thing. So all of our programs are designed to empower people through a lineage, through a community, through a structure, but also to find your own voice as an astrological diviner and artist. We have our first year program, which you can take on its own. Starts again November 8th. There's need-based tuition. So if you're someone who wants to take it, but you need a little help, we have a sliding scale. You can find yourself a good rate within. There's early bird rates for people who can afford our going rates. There's a sale going on until October 24th. So check those out. If you like the program, probably 60-70% of our students who take year one take year two. Year two adds to the natal package the timing and transit techniques. So year one is natal delineation, year two is forecasting. We really feel like if you're on a professional track, you want to practice for others, even part-time, year one and year two together will prepare you. So it's about a 2-year training process. And there's certification exams and stuff like that. If you just want to take it for yourself, you don't have to take the exams at all. You can kind of just take it for yourself. Everything's recorded. Everything's held live. So you can attend the live webinars, listen to the recordings on your own pace. You have lifetime access to everything in the course. We have breakout tutoring sessions in between our major units of study. In addition to the 30 classes that I lead, there's really nice tutoring sessions with our staff. There's a forum discussion where you can ask questions. staffed with tutors who answer within a business day. There's a ton of bonus material, supplemental material. If you like Nightlight, you can move on to year 3, which is where we develop divinatory counseling skills. And what specifically is divinatory counseling? Because it's not the same as therapeutic counseling, although clearly there are many great astrologers who have therapeutic background and can do that too. But divinatory counseling is a specific thing that we teach in year 3. All throughout our programs, we have live clients, practice sessions. So we work on charts together. We have live people come in and you see me give a full hour reading to someone, and then we break down the craft. We do all of this kind of stuff together. The 4th year program is an annual retreat that we are hosting. Today is the last day of the early bird rate. It is called The Oracle Within, and it is about how to develop that more intuitive, artistic connection with the oracle that exists in relation to, but apart from the technical side. So this retreat that we're taking to Mexico next June, we have about 20 some spots left. Last day of the early bird is today. You can find that on the website as well. And that retreat is dedicated to how do I become something of a medium for the voice of the oracle? How does that actually happen? Because nobody talks about that. And it's really important that we be honest about it. I mean, skeptics don't like astrology in a way because they think we're claiming it to be a science. But if we're not, we're saying it's divination, then we ought to be honest about how you actually cultivate divinatory capacity. What is that? It's not the same as being psychic. It's something else. So we talk about that in the year 4 training program, which will now be hosted annually as a retreat. And then, because for me, that one is very important that it be experiential and in person. And then we have a horary program, which is a separate, very specific predictive branch of astrology that I teach as a specialty class for a year. So that's 5 years of curriculum that we have. Then we have a yearly masterclass series. Every year I teach on something very specific. 2026, I'll be teaching on the decans. So we'll be having 12 classes, 3 per season, that walk us 2 to 3 hours through all of the decans. If you don't know what that is, that's why they're called masterclass, like intermediate topics in astrology that fall outside the scope of our major curriculum. There's a whole archive of masterclasses on the website. Every month, I host a monthly webinar. So if you are someone who just wants to pop in for a random class, all sorts of fun subjects that fill up the monthly calendar. Once monthly, there's a webinar you can attend. We will also, in 2026, be starting a guild membership, which is meetings around new and full moons for alumni or currently enrolled students who simply want more time for live client work and practice work on charts. So those sessions will be devoted to being like, okay, tonight I'm going to have a client come in. I'm going to demo with this client zodiacal releasing. Or I'm going to have a client come in. I'm going to demo a horary reading. Or we're going to have a practice session where you bring charts in. So the guild meeting is a space that we're opening up because there's a lot of need in the Nightlight school community for further, engagement for learning and practice. So that'll open up in 26. So anyway, it's a really vibrant educational community. I promise you, if you like my YouTube content, this is next level compared to anything I present on YouTube. Even though I love the YouTube stuff, YouTube is really, for me, meant to be a bridge for people who want regular spiritual astrological content, and then perhaps for people who want to go deeper within the school. Thank you guys for letting me speak to all of these things. Let me just show you where you can find all of this stuff. You go over to nightlightastrology.com. Let me just put it up on the screen. Go over to nightlightastrology.com, click on courses, go to the first year course. You can learn more about it there. There's a video describing the course here as well. At the bottom, you'll find the early bird sale rates and then that need-based tuition assistance. So if you're someone who wants to study but needs a little help, please use the need-based tuition. We want to make sure that astrology is accessible for people. All the other courses are listed here. Go to events, click on Immersive Retreat. Today's the last day to join the Oracle Within retreat in Mexico next June at the early bird rate. Otherwise, the other thing that I'm excited about is if you go to Silent Sundays under events, starting October 26th, I'll be hosting a once monthly meetup for quiet community meditation. We'll be getting together for half an hour of silence once monthly, because it's my belief that people who study astrology will greatly benefit from adding more regular enhancing self-care practices into our lives. I've been including my altars, like what's on my altar, on Mondays. This is similar in its intention to, like, I've seen a lot of people be inspired to start altar practices because of that. Here's what's on my altar segment. So this is also a way for people to bring meditation, prayer, quiet time, no doctrine, no dogma, no beliefs around it. We're just literally getting together to practice quiet. If that's valuable to you, it's free. You can just click on the link. It's there on the website. I hope you guys will use it and find it of benefit. Okay, that's it. Thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it. I am now going to the gym to release all of the stress of sitting here and talking for 2 hours and 40 minutes. And I hope you guys do whatever you need to do as well if you've been sitting for a long time. So have a great day, everyone. It was good to hang out with you all. Bye.